De 3 Europaparlamentarikerna från Sverigedemokraterna rankas högst av alla i en nysläppt rankning från tidningen Brussels Report. Det som mättes i rankningen var frågor om bevarandet av självbestämmande, transparens och frihet. With me today to discuss more, I have the editor-in-chief of the Brussels Report and the creator of the ranking, Peter Kleppe. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit more about this ranking?
Sure, of course. So I thought it was really important to monitor what members of European Parliament are doing. And so that's how I set off to create this ranking, basically trying to select votes to then judge members of European Parliament. So I have selected 18 votes. 11 of 18 are about either financial transparency or accountability, so nothing to do with left or right, basically things that everybody, I think, should support. And then there are also topics like civil liberties, subsidiarity, so to basically respect the sovereignty of national democracies in the EU. And last but not least, free market economics, because the values of the website I'm managing, brusselsreport.eu, are to support the EU, but to make sure that it is reformed into an instrument to open up trade and to foster free market economics and trade, because this will bring economic benefits to Europeans.
And why did you choose these particular categories?
Well, frankly, it was not so easy to find good votes. So I let it flow naturally, and it ended up in me receiving from my contacts in the European Parliament from different groups votes that indeed mainly relate to transparency and accountability. So the first 2 votes are about the question whether MEPs should disclose how they use 4,400 euro they receive every month on their personal account for office expenses. Now, at the moment, they don't have to disclose how they use that money, so there is no check whether they do not interpret this as an extra salary on top of their 8,000 euro monthly salary. So I think that's something you would expect everybody to support, but it's just unbelievable that for 15, 20 years now, particularly the Bureau, so these are the MEPs leading the European Parliament, are opposing all attempts to open this up. And to be fair, a majority in the European Parliament has voted to have this transparency, but there were some people that openly voted against this, and I wanted to highlight that. The second vote, maybe I should not go over everything because it makes too much time, but the second vote I think is worth mentioning. This relates to I'm sorry about that. Yes, the conference on the future of Europe. You may have heard about that. So this is just another big conference that supposedly would need to discuss all the problems with the European Union and try to offer solutions. Now, it's likely that this is being hijacked by people that can be described as EU federalists, people that want to concentrate more money and even more power at the Brussels policy level. And the question here in that vote was, do you think there should be financial transparency on how this conference will be financed? Some estimates think it could cost 200 million euro, which is still not a lot for the EP budget, but it's a lot of money in total for taxpayers. So, I mean, it's very important that you have financial transparency on this. And also here, many MEPs, actually a majority, 360 versus 329, voted against financial transparency. So I could go on, but it's clear that it's very important to highlight how MEPs are actually voting, because frankly, otherwise nobody really cares. And it's important to bring this out into the public attention.
So why were the Sweden Democrat parliamentarians at the top of this list?
Well, very simple, because they voted the right way. They voted for financial transparency. They voted for financial accountability. They voted for free market economics. For example, they rejected to undermine vaccine patents. This is, I think, quite outrageous. Just after big pharma companies have managed to come up with life-saving vaccines that are also incredibly important for the world economy, and they have done that in record time. There are people that are now calling to undermine these patents retroactively. Now, everyone who knows a little bit about the topic will have to admit that if you would do that, it may sound good in theory. It's basically expropriating the intellectual property of these companies, but it would not actually help you to make these vaccines, because these vaccines, especially the mRNA vaccines, are very complex to produce. So basically just stealing intellectual property is not the right way forward. And nevertheless, a lot of people in the European Parliament support this. Even a few member states, like, for example, Spain, the left-wing government there supports this. It's very short-sighted. This could have a very big cost in the future on medical innovation. And of course, you could reform intellectual property. There's many problems with it, obviously, but to just destroy the whole framework that has given us so much progress would be very unwise. And this is, for example, a vote where the members of parliament from the Sweden Democrats voted the right way, but also many people in other parties have also been on the right side of history, I would say, when it comes to this vote. Maybe I think what distinguished them from others is that they were not willing to approve the accounts of EU spending. So what happens is the EU spends around 1,000 billion euro over 7 years. So 1/7 of that is spent in a given year, in this case in 2019, and only 2 years after, MEPs are asked to vote on whether this money has been spent in the right way or in the wrong way. Now, the European Commission has its own auditing body. This is called the European Court of Auditors. And this EU body has been, despite the fact that it is an EU body, has been very critical of the way that the European Union has spent these taxpayers' funds. Also, if we look at member states, like, for example, in Bulgaria, over the last year, there has been many protests against the Bulgarian government, with corruption allegations and with allegations that the prime minister himself, Mr. Boyko Borisov, would have been engaged in profiting from these funds. The same problem we can see in Hungary with accusation to Mr. Orban or the Czech Republic. I mean, these are gigantic sums for these countries. They create a lot of corruption. The Bulgarian government was basically lost and suffered a big election defeat as a result of this misspending. And you would expect that the European Parliament, which is supposed to be, let's say, the watchdog of EU spending, would say, hang on a minute. I mean, we do not approve this kind of spending, even if we're only supposed to vote on it 2 years after the fact. We do not approve that. We want to have stronger safeguards that taxpayers' money is not propping up authoritarianism, is not helping organized crime in Italy, for example, and is not propping up big farming interests. Farmers often receive these funds simply for owning land. Now, long story short, people in the EPP, the more centrist parties, they are very wary to do that, to reject this EU spending. Well, indeed, the MEPs from SD, but they were not on alone. They have no problems basically voting against EU spending. And in a way, for many years, the Swedish government, together with the Dutch government and the UK, when it was still a member, have also been very critical, have been at times voting against providing discharge to EU spending. So it's very strange that people in the European People's Party, the moderates in this case, that they are not more critical. I've also written that in my analysis. It's true that Eurosceptics are very high on the lists, on the ranking, but actually many of these votes, you would expect everybody who's also even in favor of more power for the EU, which is a legitimate point of view, to also be very critical how taxpayers' funds are being spent.
So what would you say is the general state of the respect of civil liberties, freedom, national sovereignty, and things like this in the European Parliament today?
Well, I think it's quite problematic. I think the European Parliament is in theory a good idea, but in practice, it's not serving as a watchdog for the EU machine. It's more like a motor. You know, it wants the EU to spend more when it has the chance to, like you say, protect civil liberties. It's nowhere to be seen. Take the vote on the EU vaccine passport. I think this is something potentially quite dangerous. To create a document where governments can have all kinds of medical info, we could see that the Austrian government, for example, is already proposing to also have taxation information in that document. So it's written in the stars that this can be easily abused. Whereas of course, it's a good idea to facilitate travel and to reduce bureaucracy for citizens, but you could simply do that by as long as the COVID crisis rages, to require tests. Because also maybe if we have new variants, you need new vaccines. So how do you deal with it then? So even if I was, for example, a country like Greece, very dependent on tourism, I would not push for this vaccine passport. I would say, look, we don't want to take the risks. We basically will ask everybody who enters to undergo a rapid COVID test. And these days you have all these rapid tests. So this is much more feasible, I think, than a year ago. Long story short, this vaccine passport is a potentially dangerous tool that could undermine civil liberties, could actually also undermine the Schengen zone, which, for example, then which would really, I think, an unfortunate thing. And you would expect MEPs that, make reports complaining about civil liberties all over the world to maybe start at home. But here they simply, a majority just passed this through. And I think now at the moment even, you have some talks going on between the European Parliament and the member states. And it's true that the MEPs are asking for more safeguards, which is good. But I mean, they have already given up all of their leverage really by simply supporting the idea of vaccine passports and all the dangers it brings. Civil liberties groups in the EU were very disappointed with the European Parliament stance there. So I think only this case tells you a lot about the state of the European Parliament and how it really should get its act together.
The European Parliament should get its act together. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining me to discuss this today. And thank you everyone for watching RIX. Hej allihopa och tack så jättemycket för att ni tittar på RIX. Glöm inte att prenumerera på våran kanal genom att trycka på knappen här nedanför. Och om ni vill ha nya notiser om de videos som vi lägger upp så tryck på ringklockan.